Hello everybody. Today we're going to take a look at how to analyze some data using Google Sheets. So let's go ahead and get right to it. So as you can see here, I'm in Google Sheets and I have some data input into my Google Sheet. This is position versus time data here that we've collected. So we see in column A we have data for time here. And then columns B and C, we have position data for two different carts. And what we're going to try and do is get an idea of how to create a graph using Google Sheets of these position versus time data. So first of all, the first thing you want to do before you create your graph is highlight your data set. And this includes highlighting the labels for the data sets. So I've got time, cart 1 position, and cart 2 position. When I highlight my data to graph, I want to highlight those column titles as well. So I'm going to go ahead and highlight the entire data set, including the column headers. And now I'm going to go ahead and insert a graph. And there are two ways that you can do this. You can go to the Insert menu in Google Sheets here and click Chart. Or alternatively, over here in the toolbar, you can click the chart icon, Insert Chart. Now, I clicked off of my data, so I need to re-highlight my data. But I'm going to go ahead and use the toolbar here, and I'm going to select Insert Chart. So that brings up a chart and a chart editor. Now, for our science classes, the first thing that we want to do is change the chart type. We are going to, with Google Sheets, use scatter plots or a scatter chart. So over here in the chart editor where it says chart type, by default this is usually a column chart. That's not what we want. We want a scatter chart. So go ahead and scroll down and select the scatter chart option. That's the first thing that we want to do here. And you will notice that because we selected the entire data set, including the labels, the column headers, that our chart is already pretty well set up. You'll notice over here in the chart editor that it has picked the first column, column A, to be our X variable. And then columns B and C have been selected as Y variables or dependent variables. If this doesn't happen automatically, you can always add the series manually by clicking Add Series and then selecting the appropriate data range in your Google Sheet. But hopefully most of the time, Google Sheets is able to figure this out for you correctly the way that you want it. And it's even using the appropriate labels here for my two dependent variable sets, cart 1 position, cart 2 position, because I selected those labels, those titles as part of my data set. So this graph looks pretty good, but we're missing a lot of information that we need to analyze this data in science class. But lucky for us, Google Sheets offers a lot of customization. So over here in the chart editor, what we want to do next is click on the Customize tab. And we're going to go ahead and start with the second menu here that is Chart and Axis Titles. So we know that when we make a graph in science, we need to have appropriate axes labels as well as an appropriate graph title. So let's start with the axes labels here. So you notice under the Chart and Axis Titles menu that you can select what title you want to edit. We can edit the chart title, a subtitle, horizontal axis title, and the vertical axis title. So we started here with the vertical axis title. Let's go ahead and add that. So my vertical axis is my dependent variable, which for our data set is position. And the unit here is centimeters. So we can add that. You can, customize the font and the color if you want, but we're going to go ahead and stick with the defaults for now. I'm now going to select my horizontal axis and give that a title. So my independent variable for this experiment was time, measured in seconds. Notice that this is automatically editing my chart. So now I have my Y variable and my X variable labeled. Each of those axes now has an appropriate label. And then I want to give my graph, my chart, a title here as well. We're going to use the form Y versus X for our chart title. So this is going to be position versus time, and we'll go ahead and add a subtitle here as well, and say for two objects, since we're comparing two objects here. Now, by default, it right justifies the chart title. I don't necessarily like that, so we're going to change the justification here. So select chart title and alignment, going to center that title, and select chart subtitle. We're going to center that as well. So that looks pretty good so far. So another thing that we like to do in science class is to analyze the relationship between the variables that we are graphing. And we can do this in Google Sheets if you go to the series menu. So I'm going to click off of the, going to click off of the chart and axes title menu there. We're going to go to the third menu in the list, the series menu, and click on that drop-down menu. And here we can choose either of our dependent variables, cart1 position or cart2 position. Let's go ahead and pick cart1 position. And you can add error bars and data labels if you want. But what I'm really interested in here for our science classes is adding a trend line. So this is like a best fit line. If we go ahead and click trend line, you'll notice that some additional options pop up here. By default, the type of trend line is linear, but you can do exponential, polynomial, logarithmic, power series, or moving average. You can also change the characteristics of the line, the label for the line, and even show an R-squared value. So let's look at how we can customize this with the data for cart1. Looks like we do definitely want to stick with a linear trend line here. We could try out different fits, polynomial, power series, logarithmic. Ultimately though, linear fit looks pretty good for this data set. If we want to get an equation, so if you want to figure out the slope of that best fit line, that trend line, over here in the chart editor, underneath the label option, you can pick use equation, and it shows up over here in the chart area then. So let's kind of highlight that so everybody can see what we're talking about right here. So this is giving us a slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, for that best fit line that we have set for cart1 for that particular data set. And so we see here that the slope of this particular line is about 65, so 65 centimeters per second would be the average velocity for that cart. R-squared is another option that you might find yourself using here as well. An R-squared value, if you don't know, gives you a relative indication of how a best fit line or a trend line matches your data set. So in Google Sheets, the R-squared values are going to be given between 0 and 1. The higher the value, the closer the value is to 1, the more correlation, the greater the correlation between your data set and the trend line that you have selected. So if we click that R-squared value, show R-squared value option here, you'll notice that it's added below, or next to rather, my equation, an R-squared value of 0.997. So that's a pretty high correlation, pretty good correlation from my linear fit for the data set for cart1. We can do the same thing for cart2. So back over here in my series menu in the chart editor, I'm now going to pick cart2, and we're going to try a trend line. You'll notice here that the linear trend line, if we do an equation and get an R-squared value, that's a lower R-squared value, 0.968. And the fit doesn't look very good on the graph either. So let's try a different fit here. Let's try a polynomial fit. We get a new equation. It is a quadratic equation. We also get a new R-squared value, and that one is an R-squared value of 1, which is pretty nice. That's what we like. So you can see here that it is pretty straightforward to analyze data in Google Sheets. You can get regression equations. We see the linear regression here, and then the polynomial equation here for data set 2 that shows up right there in the chart legend. Speaking of the chart legend, that's another menu over here in the chart editor, the fourth menu down. This allows you to select the position of the chart legend, so we can put that at the bottom of our graph or on the left side if we want. By default shows up on the right side. You can even choose to have no legend at all if you want. But this is typically something that you're going to want to have, especially if you're going to be performing any sort of analysis on your data like we did with our linear regression for cart 1 earlier and the polynomial line for cart 2. And then there are some other customizations that you can do here in the chart editor. You can change the scale of the axes for the horizontal and vertical axes if you want. And then you can also change the number of grid lines or the character of the grid lines. That's not something we're going to focus on here today because we're really just interested in how to analyze data using Google Sheets. Okay, so that's a quick overview of how to analyze data using Google Sheets. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, of course, always let me know via email or through Google Classroom.